Start the recording to the meeting. And good afternoon, everyone. Time is 1:03. Probably we can start the meeting now. And, thank you for joining. Today, we have Mr. Terry Brandsma from UNC Greensboro, and he's going to talk about the hiring during the pandemic, that is reimagining process and discovering efficiency. That's the title. And we have some housekeeping information. And we have the closed captions, the live transcript going on. If you like, you can remove the closed captioning by clicking the arrow next to the live transcript CC and selecting hide subtitles. Okay, when you do that, you may not be able to see the transcript. If you want to see, you don't have to do anything, just that. Okay, and we are recording this meeting, and this section, yeah. So if you, all chats will be recorded as well, including private chats. Just want to let you know. And a recording of sections will be emailed after the section's over, after the end of the conference. We will send it to you probably 1 or 2 days later. And we will be monitoring the chat. So you can enter your questions and comments there. And please be sure to use everyone when sending a chat to the group. Okay. So it's all yours, Terry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me go ahead and start to share my screen so that you'll see the presentation itself. Okay, we got a small crowd here today, but I'm thankful you're here for the interest. Welcome. Again, I'm Terry Brandsma from UNC Greensboro. Last year, as the pandemic began, we were at the beginning stages of several position searches due to vacancies and a couple of newly created librarian positions. But then in mid-March of 2020, we went into lockdown, as did many other universities and organizations, forcing many of us to make drastic changes to our library services and operations. When we realized that the pandemic would affect our hiring processes, the search committees met with library and university administrators to decide if we should proceed with the searches or delay until we were able to reopen again. We decided to continue, and it's fortunate that we did, as we had no idea that many of us would be working remotely for over a year now. Today, my intent is to describe how my library's hiring processes were changed due to this pandemic and to provide some ideas that may benefit all of us as we continue to fill positions throughout the pandemic and possibly beyond it. And there should be plenty of time at the end of the session for questions and discussion. First, a bit about UNC Greensboro and the University Libraries for some context. UNCG was founded in 1891 as the State Normal and Industrial School for Women. In 1932, it became the Women's College of the University of North Carolina when it united with UNC Chapel Hill and what is now known as NC State University as the first of the three institutions of the UNC system. In 1963, we became fully co-educational with the new name of the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. We are now the fifth largest of the 17 UNC campuses, and we are consistently recognized nationally among the top universities for academic excellence and value. We are also designated as a minority serving institution, and currently approximately 15% of our students are people of color. The University Libraries has two branches. The Walter Clinton Jackson Library serves the research and general needs of the university, and the Harold Schiffman Music Library, located within the School of Music building, specializes in music materials and services. We also support several other affiliate libraries on campus, including an extensive teaching resources center operated by the School of Education and the Intercultural Resource Center operated by the Office of Intercultural Engagement. About a third of our library employees are professional librarians, most of whom have faculty status, rank, and must be reviewed for reappointment and tenure. All of our librarian positions are advertised nationally, and we do occasionally have international candidates. To compare in-person interviews to our virtual interviews, I'll first need to describe how my library conducted the hiring processes pre-pandemic. From my experience and understanding, most academic libraries have a standard hiring process to ensure fairness, equity, and uniformity. In my library, the search, interview, and hiring process is quite comprehensive and often extends for several months. The preparation process is detailed on this slide. All of these steps occurred before any candidates were brought to the campus for an interview. The first step is the approval of the job description.
Yeah, let each institution address that how much they need, but I'm proud of each institution.
But I like that.
Thank you for muting. The first step is the approval of the job description. This is typically negotiated between the hiring library department and library administration and must also be approved by the provost office and campus human resources. The position is then advertised nationally in both print and online job sites, including ACRL, NCLA, and as many job-related email lists as we can find. The search committee is appointed to handle the details with guidance provided by a member of library administration. The search committee is typically only 5 to 6 people with both faculty and staff representation, primarily but not exclusively from the hiring department. And we often have an appointee external from the libraries, usually from an academic department related to the area that the position will support in some manner. The search committee has access to all of the applications, which must be submitted through our campus's central job search website. The committee develops and uses a standardized rubric to evaluate all of the applications. For faculty positions, each application must include a cover letter, a resume or CV, and at least 3 professional references. After the search committee has reviewed all of the applications, they select the top candidates for telephone interviews. The number of telephone interviews varies based upon the application pool. The committee develops a set of standard telephone interview questions, and responses to these questions are recorded and ranked for each interviewee. The search committee then uses these rankings to determine the 2 or 3 finalists, and then begins the scheduling and planning processes to bring each finalist to campus for a full interview. Our library does cover the expenses to bring each finalist onto campus for either a 1 or 2 day interview. Typically, interviews are conducted over a single day, but if we are hiring for a department head or an assistant dean position, the interview is extended for 2 days so that each finalist can meet with the necessary individuals and groups outside of the libraries. Airline reservations, if necessary, and hotel accommodations are secured, and all of the local arrangements are made for the necessary meeting rooms, catering, meal reservations, and other accommodations. Each finalist typically arrives the day before the scheduled interview and stays at a local hotel near our campus. The evening prior to the interview, a few members of the search committee meet informally with the finalist at the hotel restaurant to discuss this interview schedule, confirm any necessary logistics, and answer any questions that they may have. Then on the morning of the interview, a committee member meets the finalists for breakfast at the hotel and brings them to our campus. And as you can see on this slide, the interview day is packed with meetings and includes a library-wide presentation on a topic related to the position. Short breaks are taken throughout the day, and lunch with a few of the committee members is arranged at a local restaurant. At the end of the day, we typically offer tours of the library, our campus, and even our local area, depending on the travel plans and interests of the finalist. Following each interview, the search committee creates and distributes evaluation mechanisms so that library employees that may wish to comment on the finalist in any way have the opportunity to do so. The committee chair collects all of the library input, including any feedback from the supervisor or department head, and completes the required professional reference checks and any necessary follow-ups. The committee then prepares and delivers a comprehensive report to the Dean of Libraries with details on each finalist, and if requested by the Dean, a ranked order with a recommendation on who to hire. The Dean either then follows up with questions to the search committee or forwards a recommendation to the provost and campus human resources. After approval to hire is granted, the Dean of Libraries can then negotiate the details of employment with the finalist, and if all goes well, the new librarian is appointed and begins work on the agreed upon date. So now that you know the process that is typically done in our library, what did we face with the pandemic? Beginning in mid-March in 2020, as many of you experienced, we began to reconfigure our library services as our campus transitioned to online courses and directed all students to go home. We began by shortening our library service hours of operation, then by limiting access to the building to UNCG students, faculty, and staff only, then only allowing access to library employees, and finally, we were directed to close the physical library and send all library employees home. Unsure of when we would be able to reopen, we only permitted a skeleton crew of library employees to come in for a few hours per week to handle truly essential functions. The only employee that was permitted to remain in the libraries throughout the entire pandemic was our facilities manager. As we worked through developing new safety protocols in conjunction with our campus leadership, we were told that face-to-face meetings were now prohibited and all travel was suspended until further notice. At the time of closing, our campus was licensing WebEx as our campus-wide virtual meeting platform. Because of this licensing, all campus employees had already been provided access to a personal WebEx account. But few of us had needed to use it prior to beginning our work from home. Fortunately, we had also just begun a campus-wide trial of Zoom, which quickly turned out to be our virtual meeting platform of choice due to its relative simplicity. We also needed to provide the necessary technologies to our library employees that didn't have the proper setups at home so that they might be able to work remotely depending on the assigned tasks. For example, we quickly reconfigured many of the laptops that we had previously loaned to students from the circulation desk and reassigned them to our employees. We also provided webcams and other peripherals where necessary. And to keep our employees productive, especially those who are not able to do their assigned in-library work from home, our library also created a special projects Trello board and a virtual learning community so that everyone could remain actively engaged in some manner. Also at this time, applications for our open librarian positions continued to come in through our job search portal. We had 3 active searches that were just beginning, and we needed to quickly determine if we could or even should continue these searches, or if we should halt all hiring processes and postpone them until we reopened. But we didn't know when that might be. Several Zoom meetings took place with the Dean of Libraries, and with the approval of the Provost Office and Campus Human Resources, we decided to continue and to see if we could conduct a search using a completely virtual process. The recommended deadline for applicants had not yet arrived, so my search committee began looking at our procedures so that we could determine which technologies we might use to handle a completely virtual interview and hiring process. Fortunately, it appeared that Zoom would be able to handle most of our virtual meetings, and including the full-day interview and the library-wide presentation. Zoom was still relatively new to us, so we needed to quickly ramp up our skills and become proficient with the new platform and all of its features. We also evaluated how best to share our search-related documents and other sensitive information related to applications and the finalists. For this, we chose a combination of secure box folders, shared Google Drives, and a Canvas course specifically set up for library searches, with access granted only to library employees. We also began to look at any barriers or drawbacks to conducting a search this way. Would we be able to sufficiently and effectively evaluate the finalists if we only communicated virtually through Zoom? Or were the face-to-face interactions of the typical interview a necessary or even essential part of the evaluation process? And remember that these face-to-face interactions also include informal meals, receptions, and chance gatherings that might happen between meetings. We weren't sure about all this, but we did know that we needed to fill these positions as soon as possible, so we forged ahead. We next looked at the specific areas of the search process that would need to be changed. With the restrictions placed on in-person meetings and travel, it was clear that everything would need to occur online in the virtual environment. Our search committee meetings easily moved to using Zoom. In fact, it was often easier to schedule these meetings as most of us had more availability than we might have had if we were still working from our offices on campus. Evaluation of the applications by the search committee occurred in the same way as before, but we used shared, secure documents instead. The process eventually led to the selection of candidates for our telephone interviews. Now, we normally conduct these telephone interviews in a library conference room with as many committee members as present as possible. These phone interviews also easily switched to Zoom, but we decided to only use the Zoom audio in an attempt to simulate as much as possible a standard telephone interview. But we were also able to record the Zoom audio so that committee members who are not able to attend could also hear the questions and answers. The full day interview for the 2 or 3 finalists would also need to be completely virtual. This did eliminate the need to schedule and book all travel, hotel, and local arrangements. But this also meant that we were not able to provide that informal gathering and interaction time, or the typical tours that we provide to the finalists. And unfortunately, the finalists would not be able to physically experience our library, our city, or our campus to see the areas that they would actually be working in. So now I'll describe the specifics on how we conducted the virtual searches and interview of the finalists. As I said earlier, JobSearch is the web-based software that my campus uses for all hiring processes. For faculty librarian positions, the submission does require a cover letter, a resume or CV, and at least 3 professional references. Shown on this slide is a generic representation of the matrix that I developed and the committee used to evaluate all of those applications. Listed across the top are the required and preferred qualifications as identified in the job description. When reviewing applications, we are required to base our initial evaluation only on the qualifications listed on the job description. So we look within each cover letter and CV to independently evaluate each applicant against those qualifications. Down the leftmost column, we listed the names of all of the applicants, and we used the central grid to record our evaluation of each qualification for each applicant. We chose to use a simple scale of 0 to 3, although other scales have been used in previous searches. 0 was assigned if the applicant did not meet the qualification, or if it couldn't be determined from their documents. 1 was assigned if they minimally met the qualification, 2 if they fully met the qualification, or 3 if they appeared to be extremely qualified or have qualifications beyond those required for the position, such as a PhD or an additional master's degree. And to the right of the grid, not seen in this screenshot, was also a notes field to add any details that might be useful when ranking the candidates, in addition to the numerical totals. Each committee member used their own spreadsheet and evaluated all applications independently. As the committee chair, I then compiled the totals from each spreadsheet and presented the top-ranked applicants for group discussion. This eventually led to the selection of our top candidates for telephone interviews. For this particular search, we received over 80 applications, and we selected 10 of those for telephone interviews. Both of these numbers are quite a bit higher than normal. In previous searches that I've been involved with, we are fortunate to receive anywhere up to 30 applications, and we often only selected 5 or 6 for telephone interviews. To schedule the telephone interviews, I emailed each candidate and requested that they call me to arrange a day and time. I had already identified several blocks of time that the search committee was available to meet, So I simply created the appointments as I received the calls from the candidates. I then scheduled the Zoom meetings and confirmed the date and time with each candidate by emailing the details. At UNCG, we are also required to develop and use a standard set of telephone interview questions to ensure fairness. Using the job description as a general guide, we developed 9 questions, the last being if the interview had any questions for us. I also prepared an introductory script that described how the telephone interview would take place and asked permission to record it. And we tried to limit the entire telephone interview process to no more than 30 minutes. As I said earlier, we chose to use Zoom audio only in order to simulate our pre-pandemic processes. Search committee members took turns asking the questions, and we all used our own methods to record our notes. After interviewing all 10 candidates, the committee met via Zoom to discuss each candidate and their individual responses to each of the questions. And after some debate and back and forth negotiation, we ranked all 10 candidates and chose the top 3 finalists for full interviews. So here's where we get into the real details. Setting up the interview day was the most complicated task for me as chair, as I needed to juggle many schedules. For this search, each one-day interview began at 9:30 in the morning and continued to 3:45 in the afternoon. Fortunately, we did not have to deal with any significant time zone changes, but you do need to keep that in mind. If you have candidates that will be connecting from outside of your local time zone. And as you can see from this sample schedule, there are 10 separate time slots for the various meetings, with a few breaks added in. This was the first time we were using Zoom for a full-day interview, so I also needed to be very careful when I scheduled each Zoom session and only invite the proper attendees. We considered simply creating one Zoom session for the entire day and popping in and out of it as necessary. But we chose not to do that to avoid any chance that someone would accidentally show up when they weren't supposed to, or have the Zoom session mistakenly close and not be available for reconnecting, which has happened sometimes. I chose instead to schedule several separate sessions, some using the same Zoom link as the previous session, if it was convenient to do so and the attendees were similar. I began the day by connecting with just the interviewee so that we could test the Zoom session, adjust the video and audio quality, and make sure that the interview was set up properly in their space and comfortable with their configurations. We then proceeded throughout the day, connecting with the necessary groups and individuals. And of course, this was not like our typical in-person interview, but it was the best that we could manage. Using Zoom for the all-library presentation required a bit of advanced planning. In addition to the Zoom scheduling and invitation to all library employees, the committee needed to decide several items, including if chat would be allowed and if the audience should mute video or not. Both chat and video could be a distraction to the presenter, especially if they were new to Zoom. And we didn't want any issues with the technology to take away from the content that was being presented. So in my introductory script for the library-wide presentation, I asked all audience members to mute their audio and turn off their video, and reminded them not to use the share screen or annotate features of Zoom during the presentation. We did decide to disable chat and instead asked all attendees to hold questions until the end of the presentation. For the question and answer period, audience members were asked to use the raise hand feature and be recognized by me as the chair before they turned on their video and unmuted themselves. This worked particularly well for both the audience and the interviewee. For the afternoon meetings with specific groups and individuals, I logged into each Zoom session first, then assigned the host duties over to the person leading the session. And as we are all well aware now, it is always a good idea to designate at least one co-host for every Zoom session as a precaution. Fortunately for us, we did not have any issues with Zoom or connectivity for our full interviews, but it's always better to be prepared just in case. And finally, at the end of the day, we scheduled a wrap-up session with the search committee to inform the finalists of our next steps and to answer any other questions that they may have had. It was a long day and quite a bit different from the in-person interview experience. Now, before I move on to the post-interview process that we used, here are a few tips on managing Zoom for interviews. Much of this information is commonly known now, but it was still relatively new to us in early 2020. All three of our finalists had used Zoom before, but we still offered the opportunity to test their connections and walk through how our Zoom meetings would be conducted. And as a host, again, I highly recommend that you use a script when you begin any formal interview session or when you are introducing the interviewee. The script will also remind you to start the recording, and it ensures that everyone is on the same page before you begin the session. And I'll say it again, I highly recommend you assign at least one co-host, and even assign the co-host duties to the interviewee if appropriate. Sometimes this is advantageous if the interviewee wants to use some of the advanced Zoom features that are reserved specifically for hosts. And be sure your Zoom settings are configured to allow or prevent certain activities, such as screen sharing or chat. This would be especially important if the interviewee plans to use these features as part of their presentation. And your script is also where you can remind larger audiences of standard Zoom etiquette, such as staying muted and using the raise hand features to be recognized. In early 2020, this was a much bigger issue than it is today. After each of our full interviews, the search committee requested feedback from everyone in the library. This process didn't change much, other than ensuring that the Zoom recordings of the presentation were posted to the secure site, allowing employees to view the presentation if they were not able to attend. An online evaluation using Google Forms was distributed to all library employees with the requested 48-hour turnaround time. On that form, we asked which specific interactions they had had with the finalist and how they would rate them in several general areas related to the position. Open-ended comment blocks were also provided, and we received some very good input through them. The committee also requested feedback from the appropriate department head or supervisor and conducted the necessary professional reference checks, again using a standard set of questions. We conducted the reference checks the same way we conducted the telephone interviews, scheduling them via Zoom and only using the audio features of Zoom. We also recorded them, but only for the committee members who are not able to attend. And as the committee chair, I then summarized the information received from all of the professional references for the final report. The search committee then took all of the input it received and created a report to the Dean of Libraries. In it, we detailed all of the strengths and weaknesses of each finalist. And because we were specifically asked to by the Dean, we provided a rank list with a recommendation of which finalist to offer the position to. The Dean was then free to select whichever finalist was their top choice, and then forward a recommendation to the Provost Office and Campus Human Resources for approval prior to negotiating the hiring details directly with the chosen finalist. So now we come to evaluating this entire process and to see if there were any efficiencies. Well, first, did it save any time? I believe it could have, but in this particular case, the search I was the chair of was paused by the Provost Office in late June, just after we had finished conducting our full-day interviews. The budget for the campus for the next fiscal year was still undetermined, and we were unsure if we would have the necessary funds to hire people into these currently vacant positions. Fortunately, we were given the go-ahead a few months later to continue, and we finished the process and submitted our report to the Dean of Libraries in mid-December. This resulted in hiring our finalists to begin in early 2021. But I do believe that we saved time when scheduling the full-day interviews, as we did not have to work around airline routes and the availability of our finalists to be away from their current positions for a day or two. And what about savings on staff time? Not counting the committee work and the extra planning necessary to convert this process to a virtual one, I believe it did save quite a bit of staff time. Library employees were likely more focused on the parts of the interview that they were specifically involved in and only needed to participate where they felt it was necessary. And popping into a Zoom meeting is much easier in most cases than physically going to a meeting space set up in a room within the physical library. And it certainly did save us with overall expenses. Airline flights can be quite costly depending on the location, time of year, and how far in advance they can be booked. And unfortunately for our situation, Greensboro is one of the more costly regional airports to fly into and out of. And even though we have a discounted rate at a local hotel, the overall interview cost, including meals and other arrangements, can easily reach $1,000 per finalist. And remember, these costs do come out of the library's budget. So conducting the interview virtually instead of in person allowed us to keep that money for use in other areas. And what about efficiencies with the search committee work? This one is harder to evaluate. It did take a significant amount of time for the committee to discuss all of the factors involved in moving to this virtual hiring process. But if you simply look at the time it took to conduct the telephone and full-day interviews, the committee work was probably about the same. All travel and meal arrangements are normally handled through the administrative office, so the committee didn't save any time there, but other staff certainly did. One area of efficiency I noted was the ease of processing and posting the Zoom recordings. Previously, we had used handheld digital recorders for the telephone interviews and video cameras for the library-wide presentation. And we then needed to process those recordings prior to uploading them for others to review. This was a much easier process with Zoom, as it handles recordings very well. The online review and evaluation process also took about the same amount of time as before. We had already been using online forms to collect feedback, so the process did not change much. And finally, what about the interviewee? Did they experience any efficiencies? When I recently asked our new librarian what they thought of the virtual hiring process and the interview process, they said that even though it was a very full, intense day, they really appreciated it and liked it because there was no travel involved and they didn't have to take the time away from their jobs and their families. They did express some initial reservation at not having that human-to-human interaction, but when they had some time to think about it, they said they had no negative feelings about missing out on the in-person activities, such as the meals or the tours. So yes, the virtual interview process was much more efficient for the person interviewed, at least in this particular case. So the big question is now, where do we go from here? After this first virtual interview process was completed, I shared all of my templates, forms, and documents with the chair of the next search committee, who used them as a guide to continue with their processes. We have since hired an additional librarian and are now in the final stages of hiring for a third position, with the virtual interviews completed just 2 weeks ago. And as we transition back to the workplace over the next few months, I suspect that many of us will feel the need to gather in person once again for meetings and other events. But there will still likely be the need for some of us to remain virtual as the pandemic continues to unfold. And I suspect that Zoom meetings will also continue to some extent, even if we may be simply connecting from our offices at work instead of remotely from home. Even so, because of our current successes with these virtual hiring processes, some could easily question the need to have finalists travel to campus for in-person interviews at all. arguing that the virtual process works, so let's continue to use it. Or we might choose the interview process that works best for each finalist, whether it be to travel to campus for an in-person interview or to stay in place and connect virtually for the interview. Additionally, we might also permit library employees to continue to connect virtually if that suits their needs better. These questions and others will need to be discussed and addressed when new vacancies need to be filled in the future. So thank you for attending, and thank you to the ACRL North Carolina chapter and the Community and Junior College Libraries section for hosting the conference. Please let me know if you have any questions and feel free to contact me for further information. In addition to questions, please also speak up if you'd like to share your experiences with hiring during the pandemic and how your processes may have differed from ours at UNCG. Thanks again. Now I'll stop sharing so that we can all look at each other and talk, if you'd like.
Thank you, Terry, Mr. Terry Pransma. This is awesome presentation. I think you are well detailed, step-by-step instructions, the whole hiring process. I can relate because we are also in the same process now. Because so many vacancies and we are doing everything well. And I can relate everything, even all the steps, from the phone interview to final interview, everything. And you did an awesome job. And if anyone have any questions, please unmute yourself. And if you want to come on video, please do that. And so we can definitely discuss. Yeah.
Hi, Terry. I really appreciate your presentation. That was great. And it did really, as he said, really help kind of with a step-by-step guide. We did not have any openings during the pandemic, but do have one that's posted now. So this will be our kind of first time dealing with it, and have decided that we will do things 100% virtual. I'm really curious if you could talk a little bit more about gathering feedback from people, from staff not on the committee, but that were at various sessions, and how you did that virtually. Although it also sounds like you have a robust system in non-virtual time. So I'd be interested in that information as well.
Yes, thank you for the question. Getting feedback from library employees, both faculty and staff, is critical in many of our search processes, especially for faculty positions. We do want feedback from especially department members who will be working with this person. Previously, following our in-person library-wide presentations, we posted a Google form, a simple Google form that would record responses, typically no more than 3 or 4 or 5 questions. Things like, I'm trying to think of what it is. I didn't put the example in, but how do you feel this candidate would be able to fulfill the responsibilities of this position, and provide a Likert scale for that. And then for every single question, we provided a open comment block that they could add whatever they wanted into. One of the things that we tried to do well, let me step back and I'll discuss further. Library employees are also free to talk to any member of the search committee and provide their feedback in person. That's a little more difficult in the virtual environment because we would have to connect via telephone or Zoom or some other way to do that. So in addition to reviewing all of the responses from the Google form, each committee member would then summarize the responses they received from individual staff members or faculty members. We try with the forms to, we try with the feedback to get feedback within 48 hours because we would prefer that library employees not try to compare one candidate to another and give us their own priority. This is my top choice, and this is my second choice, and this is my third choice. Excuse me, we'd prefer that the feedback we receive be based upon each individual candidate and their evaluation against the qualifications for the position so that we can do strengths and weaknesses for each candidate instead of saying one candidate, I like this candidate much better than I like that candidate, which is some of the feedback we get, and we try not to have that affect our opinions in the final reports. All of the feedback is anonymized and summarized, other than the feedback from the department head or the supervisor that is specifically provided and noted that this is the feedback from that person or individual in the final report. Does that answer your question?
It does, and that was super helpful. Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Let me see if I can adjust my light a little better so I'm not so dark. I don't know how best to do it. Okay, that's better. Any other questions, or would people like to talk about the processes that they might have used? There was a great presentation, I'll note earlier, by 5 faculty members from North Carolina A&T State University called How 5 Librarians Navigated a New Job During the Pandemic. I found their reactions to being hired either immediately before or during the pandemic to be very insightful. And I tried to get some of that feedback from our new librarians. And I know several others. I know the librarian that we hired for the position that I was chair for will be talking about that at a future conference. So look for that on how onboarding processes worked for that.
And Terry, I have a quick question. So when you talk about the search committee members have a discussion to make the final top 3 candidates, maybe 2 or 3. So, so after you rate the candidates after the telephone interview, so you all the committee members meet virtually and make a decision to make a finally 2 or 3.
Yes, with the telephone interview process, we used 9 standard questions, and UNCG requires this of us, that any question we ask a candidate for an interview, we have to ask all the candidates. That doesn't preclude us from asking follow-up questions, but we need to make sure that we ask all of the same questions to the candidates to make sure that it's fair. So we asked the 9 questions, and each of us recorded answers to those 9 questions. And some of us used a very similar rating scale, 0 to 3 or 0 to 5 or 1 to 10, whatever they wanted to do. Because we had 10 telephone interviews, we had quite a few. It took us quite a bit of time to go through all of those. It did become clear for a couple of the interviewees that they weren't a good fit for it, so from a group of 10, it was easy to, move aside 2 or 3 automatically that said, these candidates did not interview well for the telephone interview. For the remainder, as I recall, of course, this was a while ago, but as I recall, we each selected the top 4 candidates based upon our individual evaluations. And so then we ranked them 1 through 4, and I just use a simple spreadsheet and rank them all and assign numerical values to those. And the people who had the smallest number, my number 1 might have been somebody else's number 4. And so the people who had the smallest numbers, rose to the top for the top 2 or 3 candidates. And then we did a lot of discussion, because there might be very small variations between, the 3rd candidate and the 4th candidate and the 5th candidate. And so we did have several discussions with that. And we went with the best that we had, the best judgment that we had, which is really how all search committees work ultimately, and selected the 3 candidates for the full interviews. So We also had the option, which we have done in previous searches, that if we have conducted the full interviews for our top 3 candidates, and we didn't feel that these candidates were competitive, that we could bring other candidates up and conduct additional interviews. That's much more difficult with the in-person interview process because of the timing and scheduling and getting the people on campus, especially with the expense. You know, when you spend up to $1,000 per candidate to bring them in, it can get costly. And we've even brought people in from overseas for flights. You know, and those flights could be $1,500 just to get them here. So we need to look at those kind of aspects in addition to just how they might rank, you know, for that. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. Yeah, it's nice. Yeah, definitely. You did. Yeah, I got some information. Because we're also in the process. Just want to make sure we are doing the same thing. You know, we're doing it properly. Thank you. Okay, I think time is 1:49. If anyone have any final questions, because we can wrap up quickly.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate you attending, and I appreciate the conference organizers for putting this all together. I've found the conference to be very interesting so far, so I'm looking forward to that rest of the afternoon sessions.
That's great. Thank you so much, Terry. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Terry.